Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to today's DevOps.com program brought to you by TechStrong and OpsMX. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning, and we do have an exciting panel ahead. First, I need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded. If you miss any of our discussion, or maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab, which you can find on the right side of your screen. Since this is a panel conversation, we do really want you to send in questions, so please feel free to be part of our program today. For any other thoughts or just hellos, you can send those over to the chat tab. And we do have two polls, which we'll be going over here toward the beginning of today's program, so please keep an eye out for those, as we really do want your participation. And my final note, of course, before we close, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. Our topic of discussion today is accelerating and securing Argo CD software deliveries at scale. And I'm joined by Srinivas Perry, Director of Ethos and Cloud Platform Engineering at Adobe, Edgar Magana, Senior Principal Software Engineer at Splunk, Gopinath Rabala, CTO of OpsMX, and leading our discussion today, we have Mark Levy, Senior Director of Product Marketing at OpsMX. So to our panel today, thank you all so much for joining us. Mark, I'm going to let you take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Cody, and greetings, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend this webinar. My name is Mark Levy, and I'll be moderating today's panel. I focus on product marketing here at OpsMX. Before introducing the panel, we have a couple of poll questions for the audience. The results of the polls will help us in our discussion today. So please fill out both polls. So while you're filling it out, I'll just sort of lay the groundwork, or give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So, you're here, right? Because Kubernetes probably, has become the #1 platform for building cloud native applications, but key constraints still tend to be maybe lack of adequate skills and mature DevOps practices to operationalize and succeed with large scale production grade deployments. This is really where our open source Argo comes in. So today we're going to explore the challenges and solutions modern enterprises face when scaling continuous delivery in Kubernetes and Argo. Our panel today will focus on how their experiences with Argo and how they have implemented practices like CD, GitOps, and Progressive Delivery. How are we doing on the polls? Okay, there we go. So just try and get an idea of where we're at with the polls. This will help us with the panel. So while you're looking at that, and maybe you can run the second poll, Cody, would be great. Sort of the format of the panel, what we're going to talk about, I've sort of looked at it from sort of the day 0, day 1, day 2 kind of model. We'll start off really starting with like day 0 topics, like, why, main decision points, requirements, objectives, and design for Argo. And then we'll move on to implementation, migration, and onboarding, and then discuss day 2, best practices, issues, and lessons learned. So let's first go around the room. Maybe Perry, start with you, go around the virtual room. If you can give an introduction with yourself and your background, maybe provide a little overview of your current environment and your current Argo, state of Argo.
Perry. Right. Hi, guys. Good morning, good evening, depending upon where you're joining from. I am Srinivas Perry. Like Mark mentioned, you can either call me Perry or Sri. I will respond either way. I'm a director of engineering working for Adobe. And I'm part of the Cloud Foundations group. And my main responsibility within the Cloud Foundation group is the developer experience, responsible for providing an internal developer platform for thousands of Adobe developers. And we have been at this journey for some time. As a part of it, we have been iterating on it. So our recent one is actually able to use Argo, GitOps, and all that stuff, and then able to provide a flexible CI/CD to entire Adobe product teams. We can talk more about it as we go along. Thanks for having me.
Right. Edgar, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. My name is Edgar Magana. I'm a senior principal here at the Splunk. My journey, my background actually is a network engineer. Back in 2014, I decided to join the DevOps world, working on other open source projects such as OpenStack and Spinnaker. And recently, when I joined Splunk, we started a journey to enhance the CD experience for our developers. We want to bring them deeper observability, not just from the resources after the deployment, but during the deployment and while we expand to multiple regions in the cloud. So that's when we started looking for better alternatives, and we found Argo. We started our journey. I was surprisingly very short journey to actually move from POCs all the way to the first staging environment and to date in production. We're very happy with the results so far. So I've been doing DevOps for some time, and happy to be here and sharing my experiences. Thank you, Mark.
Gopi, you're up.
Very good. Thank you, Ed, for that. I'm Gopi Rebala. I'm CTO of OpsMX. Briefly, OpsMX is an intelligent software delivery platform company. Our mission is essentially to provide capabilities to deliver software without human intervention. What that means is essentially we are striving to simplify this automation with purpose-built platforms for the software delivery, and aiding that with rules-based or machine learning capabilities. I work very closely with our customers, striving to understand what their needs are and bring those capabilities into the platform, making their journey easy to deliver their software to their customers.
Super. Great. So what I'd like to do, let's start with, and I sort of like I mentioned in the outline earlier, sort of these day zero topics, and I sort of want the panel to talk about the main decision points, because we had a high percentage of attendees just starting out, with this Argo journey. So I'd really like, maybe Edgar, you mentioned in your introduction a little bit about sort of the journey. What were the main decision points in choosing Argo? Did you compare other solutions? Also, I think interested in, like, where does the open source model, fall into deciding the solution? Is that a preferred model? So maybe let's just start there. Like, why Argo?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. All right. We call it enhanced CD experience, if you notice from my previous introduction. Why? Because probably most of the people who already use Kubernetes, they already have a way to do continuous delivery. They already run kubectl commands. They probably scripted. They probably have some kind of like pipelines, workflows. They probably already are in that state, right? We were happy that way, right? But we wanted a better visibility. We wanted to know, like, if the state of the resources in our destination Kubernetes cluster really matches the desired state, right? Basically, configuration drift. That's when we start thinking about, like, what kind of system can we put on the top of our CI/CD pipelines, right, to get to that level. We did a little bit of research. There's really not much out there who can actually give us this single pane of glass for monitoring and tracking the state of resources, right? Everybody will have their observability. Everybody will know, if there is a performance threshold cross in their application because they actually have, certain sidecar containers in the deployments to analyze data and all those kind of things. But for us, that was too late already. We wanted to know what is happening during the deployment, right? And that's when we start doing a little bit of research. We also wanted to bring GitOps. So actually, our first experiment was with a different GitOps project, Flux. But when we did Argo, what really make a lot of sense for us is not just the open source community is growing around it, but also has another services around it, other projects such as Argo workflows, events, rollouts. Then when you think about the big picture, it brings a lot of the tools that you need for fully automated your deployments rollout across all the regions, right? You guarantee a better quality of your deployment when you use Argo rollouts in one cluster. But what happens when you go across environments or clusters, right? How can you control that deployment? Let's say that you want to have your clusters for your MVP players, right? Your customers that are the largest customers, and you want to be sure that everything went through a lot of testing before you get there. Well, you need to control those rollouts at the cluster level across all the regions, not just within the cluster. So then we start thinking like, if we're going to need another orchestration system on the top of the CD system, why don't use something that already exists like Argo workflows, right? So the Argo community was a big decision point for us. We didn't want to have an uncohesive platform, and that's where we are today. That was one of the things. Open source is very important. At Splunk, we truly believe about supporting open source community. Actually, we have 90 plus Splunk applications out there which are open source, and we actually supporting internally. And a surprise thing is like all those open source applications are being tested internally via Argo, believe it or not. So yeah, it's looking so far really good. Thanks.
You're on mute, Mark.
Mark.
Sorry, Perry. Open source important, and can you sort of what kind of decision points did Adobe consider?
Yeah, I think before I start with Argo, I just want to provide a little bit more context because I see that some of them are starting in the early stage of I think as well. So cloud, right? Cloud has been with us for more than a decade right now. Adobe start moving into the cloud in 2011, right? I think the whole decade. So when we think about the cloud, how do you take the code that you are writing to the code to cloud journey? I think that is the big part of what we are talking about as a context of all of it, right? So before even we went to Argo, the tool chain has been evolving over the last few years, and then we had all different kinds of tool chains as we go along. So before we moved to Argo, we had our own custom solution. We had a lot of homegrown solutions that we did with an evergreen main branch kind of a concept. And then we got it working, and several thousands of services already working at Adobe using that homegrown solution, right? And the challenges that we faced with our custom solution is as the Kubernetes is evolving fast, and how do you kind of keep up with this, right? I think the choices of why we should move to an open source kind of thing was quite obvious for us, especially when the GitOps was kind of getting onto the track over the last 2 or 3 years. So we were definitely looking for something which is GitOps based and also Kubernetes native, and also looked around something which is in the CNCF, and Argo was a very good obvious choice, so that we were able to put together a flexible and customizable solution on top of it.
Interesting. Gopi, you have a sort of a different perspective, right? Being a vendor. I mean, we use Argo, of course, internally, but also, OpsMX has chosen to spend significant resources also within Argo itself. So why don't you give us your perspective?
Right, Mark. I think we had 2 different perspectives on selecting the Argo. It's one thing that we are saying is, as a vendor, we provide solutions with Spinnaker and Argo. As the Kubernetes is gaining traction, now Kubernetes has become a de facto container management platform. And one of the features of Kubernetes is this declarative nature of deployment with applications. And that blends really nicely with the GitOps model. And one of the cool features with Argo is that it's fairly easy to start off with. You can install and deploy your application in 10 minutes, the first one. So that is very appealing for a lot of organizations. So we've seen as the Kubernetes is growing, the need for simpler deployment structures and ability to manage them is what people are looking for. And that's a very appealing piece with the Argo CD. And with the popularity of the Argo CD, then we started seeing these additional projects that are coming up with Argo CD that are also gaining traction. We just had ArgoCon, and there is a lot of energy there with Argo CD and the growing community, and it's a very responsive community. And I think that's one of the biggest advantages here that we see. The security is a big focus. And for the last year and a half, I think a tremendous amount of focus has gone into how do you manage secrets, how do you secure the system, and deploy in a multi-tenant fashion. So that's kind of what we see as a driving force behind the adoption of Argo CD.
Yeah, I'm curious to the panel. You mentioned, Edgar, along the ways of, I think, your introduction, your enhanced experience. I think you use that term. And so I'm curious sort of on the core requirements and where they came from. I mean, were the requirements to, of course, the proliferation and the importance of Kubernetes. Kubernetes could be sort of viewed as maybe difficult. So you'd like having tools to make those easier, right? Maybe there's a lack of skill, Kubernetes skill that Argo can help solve. But what about the requirements from maybe your developer community and things like that? How much of that went into influencing your choice?
Right. Yeah. Actually, they were the drivers. They were. I consider them our customers, right? Like Perry. I also belong to development productivity, development platform at Splunk. So our role is to, provide the best tools, systems, platform for our development team to ship to production as soon as possible, right? With the highest quality and without performance implications. Pipelines were working to actually deliver the Kubernetes manifest into our target clusters. But when the developers wanted to know, like, is my deployment good enough? I mean, from the Kubernetes perspective, as long as the container come up, it will start, telling the Kubernetes cluster everything is looking good. But the only way that you can actually see resources is going to different dashboards to see what kind of metrics you're getting are your containers. And again, this is kind of like a little bit late for the developers, right? What we wanted is a single pane of glass, right? Argo CD is really good on showing you all your deployments across all your target clusters. It could be even in different clouds. You don't even know, right? It could be actually a Kubernetes cluster hosted in one public cloud versus in another public cloud. From the developer perspective, they just need to know, okay, I just want to filter it out by my clusters in the West region of America, right? And you can actually label your deployments. You can actually customize your labels, and you want to see, okay, I just want to filter it out, all the applications that are going to be serving traffic for my, as I said before, my MVP customers, right? So in only one dashboard, you have access to all the applications, all the resources, the state of the resources. You also have access even the logs of the pods, the events of the pods. You can actually compare your design manifest with your live manifest. So in the past, what the developers they need to do is to go to the terminal, connect to the clusters. They need to do the two-factor authentication. They need to actually, switch context. And they need to went from one cluster to another cluster. Today, we reduce normal operations that normally will take, 45 minutes to, a couple of minutes, one dashboard, a couple of cleans, single sign-on one time, and then you have access to all these resources.
Wow, super. That's very interesting. And you mentioned, I want to sort of move on to sort of the day one, because you talked about some of the implementation details. And Perry, you mentioned where you came from, the homegrown world, which I'm assuming that is like, a lot of people come from that, the world of scripts. So can you describe a little bit more about that experience and the transition? So I'm really, I think, interesting. How do you get, you've made your decision. It seems like you've made your decision on Argo. Now the hard work sort of comes. You've captured your requirements. How'd you get from point A to B?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, I mean, as I said, right, I think our developers, thousands of Adobe developers, they already got used to this homegrown solution, which is kind of like a paved path. Everything is taken care of them. You just put this file into the Git and click few buttons and you're good, right? When it is working like a charm for 30% of the use cases. And those developers, they have their own business to do. They care nothing about Kubernetes, right? I mean, they do if they want to, but I think most of the time they have their own business to do, right? That is one set of developers, right? Then other set of developers, we gave them, this is your Kubernetes clusters, this is your namespace, go, right? And they went wild. I think they did all kinds of things with all kinds of clusters, and then bring the different kinds of solutions, including Spinnaker and all that, right? The challenge for us right now is when we are trying to choose this Argo and trying to implement this Argo solution, how do we kind of keep this, the flexible is a word that I want to kind of use, keep the flexibility, right? And then able to turn the knob of how much you want to do it. The way we put together in our current system right now is, actually it's not just Argo CD, right? It's all 4 Argo projects. So we kind of have our Kubernetes clusters, and we have a hub cluster, which is where we put in Argo CD and also Argo workflow and events, and Argo rollouts runs on the cluster. And we actually connected the ever existing homegrown system into the subcluster. So that's how we are able to connect bridge the gap between these two things, right? Our goal is to kind of give a same defaults, whatever the people got used to and all that, with respect to give a templates and give them in a GitOpsy way. Still, that file looks, they don't get to see the Helm charts. They don't get to see all things and all. They will still see the same file that they previously got used to, right? The only difference right now is when they need a flexible requirement, they need something else they need to do. There are more things within their Git repo. They'll be able to see, they can go and tweak some more Helm charts, and they can customize the Helm chart. They can do some more things and all that, right? It helps us to kind of turn the knob as much as we want to. I think that is the biggest thing that we were able to bring together, both from the left and right and into the middle solution out there. Yeah, pretty excited about where things are shaping up. We have a lot to learn as well.
That's great, right? I think one of the viewers also commented the DevOps itself is not very well defined and not very well adopted, and GitOps is one more thing on top. But we actually view it differently. When we go to our customers, one of the things that they look for is, how do we make it less burdensome for the developers to be able to push the code into production, right? So they are used to Git essentially. So if we can give them a simpler way where they could interact mostly with Git, if they need to deploy to Kubernetes, they don't need to know complexities with volume mounts and type of volumes or pod budgets, then we make their life easier. And GitOps, or essentially having them interact with the Git, is one way to make their life easier. If you provide a path for them, for these applications to deploy to Kubernetes through the Git. And that's one of the things that resonates well with developers, and they adopt those practices faster. In terms of having the entire workflow going from code to testing to staging to production, it may still be a not one workflow that seamlessly happens. In organizations, what we see is it is still kind of a broken pieces, but the handover or the quality of the code and the frequency at which that are delivered is tremendously improved when you make the life of the developers easier. I think that's kind of what we see with the platform that we provide. If you allow this onboarding of the developers somewhat simpler, make it easier for them, they adopt those practices, and we get the true DevOps model in delivering software much more frequently, and that leads to reliability in itself. What we have seen in the marketplace.
That's an interesting point. The self-service model. I mean, trying to reduce sort of this friction, ultimately, and you alluded to it, Perry. Developers have their own job to do. They don't necessarily want to get involved in the details of CD. So how do you guys make it easier on that? Developing, what I want to talk a little bit more about this, this model, sort of the centralized versus distributed control. Maybe Edgar, you can take, to get your thoughts. You talk about this enhanced experience. Well, so how do you enable your dev teams to get their job done without having sort of the centralized body get in the way? You got some lessons learned or challenges that you overcame, or some ideas there?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is like probably my advice. I saw a question in the chat that I was trying to answer, like the things that I wish I know before starting the journey. Well, the key aspect to be successful with not just Argo, any kind of open source project that you want to introduce in your company, in your teams, etc., is not just take the open source project, run a POC. Oh, it's really easy. Just run this Helm chart and it's working, and put it out there and be happy, right? You have to pave the road. You have to create templates. I recommend to have an opinionated platform for your developers. You will simplify their lives if they have less choices to choose. They are good at writing code. They are good and fixing things, right? They need the support to know what is the best way, the fastest way, the more reliable way that my patch is ready in a system integration or a regression test to make sure that I did not introduce another bug, or the quality of my fix or my new feature is the right one, right? They don't need to know all those kind of things. So don't make them make those decisions. Make those decisions for them. Provide a platform that is already templatized such a way that they can just, I don't know, register the new service in source of truth. You have an API that actually is pulling that source of truth. You can even use GitOps for that. You can actually use Argo CD, and you are pointed to that repo where people actually register the services. This is my new service. This is what are my requirements. Argo CD will take that information, just GitOps. It's not making magic here. It's just, okay, there is an API, was updated. And now you know that you need to create a Git repo for them, that you need to, pointed it to the Argo CD instance that is going to deploy to staging if you have different ones. We don't. We actually have the one that deploys to playground or staging. For production, is a different story. And then everything is already configured for them. So basically, once they have their first commit and it's been approved and tested, they will see actually their service up and running on your staging clusters with minimal effort for them. So that's kind of like my biggest advice, my lessons taken. Do not just put it out there and let them to be creative. Also about the plugins, right? Argo CD supports a lot of packaged plugins such as Help, Customize, Quebec, etc. Don't let them to pick all of them, right? Just be opinionated about which kind of package management you want to use. They probably organically teams didn't know about this, and some of them already use one, and the other ones want to use another. I think you can help them to transition to a unified package management. I have no good advice one versus the other. I tried the three that I mentioned before: Quebec, Customize, and Help, and they all work fine. So no strong opinion on that one. They've been very transparent for us.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Hey, Perry, your sort of distributed model, do you give the developers the ability to choose their tools, or do you have a select set? How do you work with that?
Yeah. First of all, Edgar, I think I very much resonate what you are saying about the giving the as much control as needed, right? That is very, very much resonates in our environment as well. Yeah, I think when you are giving this self-service tool to thousands of developers, right, things will definitely fail, right? When it could fail because of the Docker container being bad, or because of the user error, and any of these failures, they come as a support ticket request to you, right? So you already got into the business of whether it is your problem or not. You signed up for it. So it's in your best interest, platform's team's best interest, to be able to kind of put together this in such a way that when things go wrong, when there is a failure, very clearly articulate whether it is where the issue is and that kind of a things and all that, right? So this is where I think this deployment is one thing, observability is not another thing. So you need to integrate our observability right into your deployment pipeline, and then able to get the things and all that, and able to show it. So we actually developed we got so much support request coming in our way that we put in our own small team where we developed some tools. We call them as a virtual assistant tools. So where we give them, before they something happens, we give the help button. And in fact, before even when they are logging a ticket, like they have this problem, so we say, are you talking about any one of these things? Maybe you should take a look at it, right? And give a Slack bot kind of a tools where they can search for it. I think having a support model for something like this and providing the tools, that itself becomes another job by itself, right? That's one thing that we did. And second thing that we did is we call it as a platform champion model. So almost in every product teams and every group, we have identified our own buddy, and then we gave special love to them, and we went to their location and we gave some training to them, and with respect to that, and when we are working on some new things and all that, we tell, like, there is some communication that happens with them, so that when things go wrong, I mean, before even coming to us, they will help, and then there's a go-to person in that kind of a thing. That is the only way to scale. Otherwise, there is no way we'll be. I mean, 100 services okay, 200. The once you get into 1,000 services, those manual things will not work, right? So, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, Gopi. So how, like, it's so interesting, enabling dev to run, they'll run, right? So, but how do you get people moving in there, making sure they're heading in the right direction, the guardrails, and once you've enabled them, you still got to make sure they align to certain policies, right? Maybe you can alliterate a little bit on that.
That's exactly right. I think we had very similar experiences with the customers that we work with. You think initially startup is small, so you do a POC, all works great. It's a kind of similar thing that we had with the Spinnaker as well as Argo. But then once you start pushing it to the developers, you really need some kind of a paved path. Give them some templates and say, this is a common structure that you can use. Make it, provide them with some tools that allow them, without really learning everything about the tools, onboarding their services onto it. Even then, once you start scaling, and like Perry was saying, you start getting a request for things like the application. Their application is not running properly in the cluster, right? So we had to provide them that visibility or facts and support documentation reasonably well, so they can look at all the common problems that they see and try to diagnose themselves. Otherwise, the support team gets overwhelmed with all these. My container is not running. The readiness probe is failing. It's application thing at that point. So we had to provide that kind of a documentation, and it's a common theme that we see across. Part of it is also the skill gap, the familiarity with Kubernetes and how things work for the people that are coming in also plays into it, not just the unfamiliarity with the tools or Argo CD or Spinnaker kind of systems. So we do feel that the documentation and providing them the paved path and that self-service support is really critical for them to scale.
Great. Yeah, that you get through that, and then maybe we can transition a little bit to, okay, we've got an onboarding and a service model sort of defined. Good. Let's talk a little bit about sort of day two. What's the current state, day-to-day operations with Argo? Perhaps Perry, you mentioned GitOps, GitOps, important deployment strategies. What's your day-to-day world look like with Argo?
Yeah, I think we can clarify a little bit on the GitOps because I see something in the chat around that as well. I think the reason GitOps has become what it is and popular is because what Kubernetes did for us, right? So this reconciliation method, you can declare it and then you can have the desired state over there, right? I think that is the magic that is happening, how we are able to apply it at the deployment level, right? So once you start your service becoming real, you have all kinds of deployment strategies that you need to use depending upon the size of the team and each team depending upon where they are in their journey. The default rolling deployments that you get as a part of the Kubernetes is good enough for several of those people, right? I think there is no need to overcomplicate than what is needed over there, right? So as a part of the new version, it comes in and then it gets the rolling deployment. But that is not true for most of the use cases, right? So I think some teams want to be very carefully navigating the path, and then they want to make sure they have another endpoint with a blue-green, so they will be able to test that, and they would like to support a blue-green kind of a deployment strategy, right? And that does not cut for many as well because blue-green has its own disadvantages. So how do you get the canary deployments? And within the canary deployment, very few teams who are matured enough to be able to do the canary analysis kind of a thing. So how do you declaratively give all these controls in a GitOps way and still able to support while the things are going on, right? So these are some of the everyday ongoing things that we see as a part of the deployment. Keeping the scaling things aside, I think these are some of the challenges and then things that happens on the day-to-day basis.
Great. Edgar, you have any insights, comments on day zero support?
Yes, recommendations. RBAC is very strong in Argo CD. Just make the right decisions from the very beginning. The RBAC in Argo CD will be a layer extra or accessibility on the top of your RBAC in your Kubernetes clusters. So Argo CD will not override unless you make some kind of changes or customization there, but will not override your RBAC Kubernetes cluster, which is great, right? Because in organizations, when you provide the CD part, but you do not provide the Kubernetes part, then you have two layers, right? Could be also the opposite, could be actually more complicated for the operations team to align in the RBAC model for the teams. You need to decide whether you want to provide visibility to all the developers across all the applications or just their applications. Also, a lot of teams, they have the concept of protected and unprotected branches, something that you need to discuss with your development teams, whether that's a strategy moving forward, because Argo CD could actually manage two types of projects, or that's the recommendation that I will do. You can have a project called Protected Project Application A, and that's basically all the deployment manifest for your production clusters. And then you have project unprotected for application A. It's the same application, but for unprotected cluster, which means your typical playground or development environments, or even maybe some staging environments. So then you will isolate it 100% via Argo projects, the two types of deployments based on your branching or folder structure to promote your manifest from one stage to another stage. So the right design for the application projects, applications, target clusters, align your RBAC configuration for Argo CD with your Kubernetes RBAC model. And finally, another interesting thing is the onboarding of your services. Again, you can use the GitOps model to actually create the projects, the application that I just mentioned before. So if you make it such a way that is self-onboarding, and you actually own the repo where you have the definition of all your projects and application, actually you can use Argo CD to self-create these projects and applications. What happens? You as an operating team, the only thing that you have to do is just to review an MR, approve it, and let the GitOps magic to happen, and you will have services on board. And you don't have to even create the MR. That's something that the developers via your documentation can do. And you don't worry about like, oh, I have a ticket that I need to create a project and an application, but the developer means to tell me what is the Okta group that I need to, or whatever group ID that I need to associate to this project application. I need to go back to them. So you simplify all that because you already have a template for the code change that they need to do, and then they filled all that information. You have a validation that pass, and then you just approve, and everything is already there.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Copy thought.
Yeah, I want to just catch up on that, right? I think provisioning, as much as we are talking about the deployment and all the deploying part, the initial provisioning of not only just the Argo tool, but everything that needs around it, right? Vaults, whatever your change management, whatever the cost center, and all the related things, right? I think getting the provisioning workflow and getting it right, that is also a code, right? Just like how we are giving a service to the developer's code, you need to give a respect to the operations code that we are writing. And then you can use Argo CD again for that. And we are actually using some of the Argo workflows and that part of it. And provisioning is one of the important component of our deployment. And then we still have quite a bit of a learning and work in that space for us.
Yeah. So that's a common theme around. We also see this when you're starting on this. Some of the things that our learnings to think about is the structure. How do you come up with the best practices? How do you structure your applications in Git, right? And for the scaling also, typically when you start using Kubernetes clusters in a larger organizations, you have a large number of these clusters. Now, how do you manage them? Do you have one Argo CD per cluster, or do you have one for all of the systems? Or how do you have a hybrid model where you have some number of clusters managed by one Argo CD, maybe bifurcated based on organization or applications? So some of the things that you need to think about. And then the security model, how do you set this security model access to different groups into that? How do you onboard, set these things up in a way that's largely automated, right? And once you have these, you also need to think about how do you monitor all of these, right? The observability is a fairly big topic, I think getting a lot of attention. But when you look at observability, it's spans both this operations side and of the infrastructure and operations of the applications, as well as feeds into the governance. So here, when we look at Argo CD, we are looking at deployment side of it. And then there is CI that is still there. The developers go through their code scanning and pushing it into repositories and having these binary scans that are happening. So when you are going to the production clusters, how do you get this observability into what is going into the production? Can you specify some guardrails in there so you know bits that are going into the production went through certain scans that are required and have the results that you expect. So these are all the things that you'd start building on top and start thinking about in the later stages. But initially, at least, you should start thinking about how you structure, what are the best practices of your Git, how do you structure your Argo CD deployment infrastructure itself, and then the security models, right? And then you build on top of those.
All right, Gopi. So we're coming up almost towards the end of our hour. I just want to make sure that we get in sort of the recommendations and sort of the futures from the panel to the audience. I think maybe Perry, we start with you. Sort of, and I want the panel to think about what are the top 3 recommendations. We had a lot of people sort of weigh in that they're just starting out. For anyone just starting the journey, what you wish you might have done differently, and then, what are your challenges moving forward? What are you looking at doing next? So if you can sort of start, Perry, with that, it'd be awesome.
Yeah. So like I said, right, I think when we started our journey 2 years ago, actually, I want to thank publicly the Intuit folks, Moklika and Hendrik, the folks over there, who are already using Argo at that point of time internally, right? We had some discussions with them. How is it going? Like, what? Before we made all this decision, before we did some POCs and hackathons, we did talk to. At that time, there were not a lot of people using it at scale. But that is important. I would say one of the things that before you guys go into it, talk to community. I mean, something like this, and then I'm happy to kind of offer any kind of an advice or help. Please reach out. I think how do we kind of use this kind of how do you put together these tools together for a production? It's not as easy as it sounds, right? There's a lot of learning that happens, and then we're happy to contribute back wherever we can, especially in the multi-tenant environment. Things can get very, very complex. And second thing that I would say here is start small, take one or two small set of services and go all the way to the production. So just not a dev environment and stage environment. Typically you experiment one of these tools and then you're probably in a group where and you can get it working, but if nobody using in production, that doesn't cut it, right? I think it's better to kind of have a couple of services and go all the way into production and then show the live traffic part of it, right? I think we are happy with the choice that we definitely made in that space. And I think what I am learning a lot in this journey is the observability part, right? I think the stuff that OpsMX folks are doing with respect to autopilot, that part, and also Intuit folks also demonstrated recently the Numa project. They will be open sourcing it in a few weeks. So the whole thing, deployment and observability are not two different things. You have to bring them together, right? I think that's the way. Those days of like somebody looks at the deployment and then after that somebody manually looks at it and then moves on, those will be gone, right? I think you have to integrate them well into the system. I think that is the area where we have a lot of investment and learning to do. I'm definitely excited towards learning from community and contributing back there. And right. What I don't know, we don't know at this point, which I probably in a few months from now, you can ask me again. We are GAing our solution and we are about to move thousands of our services into this. Okay, we think we have a right setup for our hub cluster and everything. We'll learn a lot in the coming few months around how did these thousands of services, how did our hub cluster scale? Do we have to short like Gopi is saying, right? We will know all of those things. Ask me again in 6 months, I'll tell you.
All right. Well, wish you best of luck with that, Perry. Edgar, any final recommendations and thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. You were also asking about like the things that I wish I knew. Well, it's not really I wish I knew, but I wish this tool was there 5 years ago. It's actually very reliable. It's very scalable in terms of, you know, the components, the Argo controller and the rest of the components could actually be shred very easily. We did some testing and it went very well. We're not at the scale that probably the Perry and the folks of Intuit or Adobe, but we're getting there. It depends on the model, right? It's not really the size of the company, it's the model that you implement for your services. Some companies, they implement large Kubernetes clusters for the multi-tenancy, some others small Kubernetes clusters, more service to cluster one-on-one kind of thing. It depends on your model, right? In terms of other recommendations, observability has two layers, right? From the operations perspective, you want to know, right, that your microservices, right, the components of Argo CD, if you're using other components, they're all up and running. You need to use some synthetic transactions to make sure the end-to-end operations are happening, right? You want to discover something before the customers. Why? Because in this case, Argo CD becomes the path to production. Imagine that is Friday night and the developers are out of weekend and not so much releases, but then Forlogy happening and everybody gets on call and you need to patch a vulnerability right away. And the folks from the Argo CD are having a weekend in Hawaii and the system is down, right? And you cannot patch your system. So you have to build it such a way that is, not just high available, make your DR plans. Um, you can actually build systems, especially Argo CD, which is super, stateless from your repo. So you can have a pipeline that actually recreate the whole deployment within minutes, right? So coming back to the two layers of observability, the one for your own services, right, to keep you alert if something goes south, but also the layer of observability for your customers, right? There were questions about like I make a rollout, will automatically go all the way to my production clusters, or I will be able to have a manual approval. It's up to you. There is the concept of auto sync. You can enable or disable it based on your use cases. But also you need to alert your customers if something is weird with their deployments, right? You as an operations team do not have any responsibility on your service team's deployments. That's their responsibility, or maybe your SRE team, right? You don't want to be patched for everything. So this is very important to have these two layers of observability. And the one for the customers will give you things like, are applications unhealthy, out of sync? Do I expecting these growing of application? Why we have so many applications? Maybe something is not happening the way that you're expected. I would recommend also have some kind of like synthetic deployment that you continuously run. So you know that your system is able to do rollouts independently of what is happening with the other applications. So you have your dummy application and make it all the way through.
All right.
Those will be my.
Sounds very valued advice. Gopi?
Yeah, I would echo those recommendations. You have to get your process right. Say before going into wider adoption, start with a couple of applications. Make sure you have things figured out all the way to the production. That would include your best practices, how you do the approvals, how you have the observability set up for them, those things that come around it. It's one of the things that you would also realize is there are some processes with the workflows. Right? The Argo workflows is still growing, coming up to speed. There are some common use cases that we see across multiple applications. These are not complex workflows. It's simple things like when I push some container to repository, can I trigger and deploy that one without changing the Git? Or how do I change the Git? So these are, there are 4 or 5 that we commonly see. So those things you need to automate, have those processes set up before you go to wider adoption. Having a couple of applications go all the way to production will help you determine all of these, set those common patterns up. There is a paved path for you, and then you can start adopting them. And then if you have some of the tools, some of the things that we bring to the table are also this observability on top of Argo CD. Having those kind of things will accelerate your adoption in there.
Wow, great. Thank you, Gopi. Wow, we're about ready, sort of wrapping up. Edgar, thank you so much too for managing the chat flow. You've done an excellent job. Are there any sort of final questions? Got a couple minutes left. We can look at one question we got panel that I'm curious to hear is, okay, what about hybrid environments? How does Argo work with other tools whether you're doing, VM or on-prem and as well as cloud, how does it behave in sort of that enterprise environment? Perry, you want to take a shot at that first?
Yeah, I think as long as you can declaratively mention any of your, not just deployment, right? You can declaratively mention it and able to represent it in a way. So Argo CD at the end of the day is a GitOps tool, right? So you should be able to use it for other workloads as well. That's my take on that, especially some of the things that we are seeing with the cross-plane and few other things, which are doing some nice integration on top of Argo, right? I think that's a so far we still are using a lot of Terraforms and all those things for the infrastructure provisioning, and this could be a good option where we'll be able to apply a Kubernetes native kind of way to be able to take those workloads as well, right? So we have not dealt into that yet, but that's one of our future goals.
Any other thoughts from the panel on that question? No, we're good. Okay, I think we're about ready to wrap up, Cody. I'm assuming I think it's been a great discussion and a lot of valuable information. So back over to you, Cody.
Thank you, Mark. And Srinivas, Edgar, and Gopi, thank you so much for joining us as well. A quick reminder to our audience today that the session was recorded. So following this program, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or you can find the recording living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and just be sure to look in the on-demand section. So at the top of the hour, I promised to give away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Our 4 winners are Ricardo G, Wahid M, Herv G, and Stephen L. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your email inbox to claim that gift card, but if you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder. I would like to thank OpsMX for sponsoring today's program, and to our audience, thank you so much for spending time with us. We do ask for just 1 extra minute of your time for a survey that will pop up on your screen as soon as we close out, but otherwise, we hope to see everyone at an upcoming TechStrong Learning program. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. And Srinivas, Edgar, Gopi, and Mark, thank you once more.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you.